As an English teacher, I have some fantastic authors I can choose from. I've got Plato, I've got Shakespeare, I've got Fitzgerald, list can go on. And these authors, they garner respect. They've created texts that stand the test of time. Oh, is this on? Okay. Stand the test of time, that cause students to critically think. They challenge our way of thinking. And they speak to universal themes about the human condition. Oh my God, I lost my place. Okay. But the problem with these texts when you're a developmental reader and writer is that when you start to read them and you don't have the reading skills, you can get stuck at what I call the language barrier. And so these texts, when I mean the language barrier, I don't mean that they're written in like Spanish or French or Cantonese. I mean they're written in English, but in an English that was spoken in a different era of time. And so if you think about Shakespeare and you think about Fitzgerald even, and you try to address their text, this is an English that's not spoken now. And so if you're a developmental reader or writer and you haven't built these skills, these texts can be very off-putting to you. It can make you think that reading's not fun. So let's take Shakespeare, right? He's assigned in high school. He's influential on all writers who have come after him. But he writes in an English we spoke 400 years ago. I mean, really think about that, right? We've all either read Shakespeare, we've seen his plays either on stage or screen. Do we talk like that anymore? I mean, unless you're in the play, you're rehearsing for the play, or you work at the Renaissance Fair, you don't talk like that, right? And so, again, it could be very off-putting if you are a developmental reader or writer and you haven't built those skills yet. So I assign for my developmental reading and writing classes something called a personal reading history, where I ask my students to tell me about themselves as readers from when they started reading until now. And do you know the writer who they say is the most inaccessible, the most difficult, the one who discouraged them the most from reading? Shakespeare. And I'm like, wait a second though, what about Hamlet? What about Romeo and Juliet? All this stuff they say, yes, we know. We learned that after in class. When we were trying to read it, we couldn't get to that. We learned that after in class because the language is difficult for us. And so you have that language barrier with classic texts, but you also have something that I call the problem is they can't compete with modern distractions. So when we think of college students and modern distractions, we would think of like the phone, social media, cat videos. I read this study in Time magazine that said that, I think the study was in 2015, and it said that 19% of 17-year-olds read for fun. And that's because of these modern distractions. 19%, right? And so as the person gets older, the distractions multiply and the desire for reading goes down. And so you have these two things going on, language barrier, distractions, but I'm not saying that classic texts don't deserve respect. And I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be read. They do, but by readers who are prepared to read them. And this is why I'm not afraid to assign young adult literature to college students, because it prepares them for classic texts. Young adult literature is relevant, it's interesting, it engages them, and it causes them to think critically. Young adult literature can compete with modern distractions. So if you're not familiar with young adult literature, it's written in contemporary American English. It's about people who are from diverse backgrounds from between the ages of 13 and 18. And maybe you're saying, wait a second, that seems way too easy for college. But what's really great about young adult literature is it does talk about one of the biggest universal themes of the human condition we've all gone through, especially when you get to college, is that coming of age, right? Getting through the teens. We've all either want to remember our teens or we don't want to remember our teens, but these stories speak to something that we can all relate to. And another thing I read, this really surprised me. In The Guardian, it was talking about 55% of young adult literature is read by adults. And if you think about two of the most popular titles in young adult literature, The Hunger Games and Harry Potter series, combined sales is 400 million copies. So we have to figure that all those copies are not only read by young adults. But the thing is when you get to the college level, English instructors are very hesitant to assign young adult literature because they think it's not equivalent. It can't do the same things. It can't cause that critical thinking. But I'm here to say it is equivalent, and it can create critical thinkers, and it builds those skills. So you remember the student I talked about earlier? He was in my developmental reading class. He completed his personal reading history. And in it, he said he hated reading, and he didn't have time for it. There weren't any books that were worth his time because he was forced to read all these books in high school by classic authors he couldn't relate to. And so he also had those modern distractions. He had, a 40-hour-a-week job. He was taking night classes. He had a girlfriend. He had a phone. He had social media accounts. He enjoyed playing baseball. And so the book I assigned for that class is called Unwind, and it's by Neil Shusterman. And at first he was skeptical, my student, because he looked at it and it's over 300 pages long. So he's like, what? This is too long. It's a red flag. But he gave it a shot. And what was really great is within 2 class meetings, he was coming in early to talk to me about what he had read the night before. At one point in class, he had talked about character motivation in the novel. He led a discussion about that. He had pointed out similarities of the society in the book, Unwind, to the American political system. He chuckled when he talked about how ironic it was that one of the protagonists ended up in a certain situation, I don't want to ruin it for you, at the end of the book. And when he finished the book, he immediately emailed me because he was shocked at the ending. It was one of the best emails I had ever gotten. The class finished Unwind before the end of the semester, and the student decided that he wanted to read the second book in the series, Unholy. And I just saw him 2 weeks ago, and we talked about character arc from one of the protagonists in Unwind all the way into the third book in the series, Unsold. Young adult literature can create that joy in reading again. Young adult literature can build skills in developmental readers and writers to make them maybe want to get into classic authors. Maybe he might get adventurous. Maybe he might want to download an ebook of a classic author. He might want to go to the library and check a book out. Or maybe take a literature class. But we have to let them do that, him and my other students, we have to let them do that when they're prepared. And if he's never prepared, that's okay. Because it's about building that joy in reading. It's about building his skills and his confidence. Because you wouldn't give the keys to a Ferrari to somebody who just got their driver's license 3 months ago. And you wouldn't expect someone to cook the perfect beef Wellington having only taken 2 cooking classes. That would scare anyone. It's about, again, building joy, getting them prepared. And young adult literature can do that. Thank you.